does this Rams defense match up with the Saints offense this time around?
Well, I think that they match up better this from just a philosophy standpoint. I like what I saw last week, even though the opposition is totally different in Dallas. You saw a concentration between Aaron Donald and Ndamukong Suh that they were not going to get run on. And I hadn't even thought about it. In Ndamukong Suh's career, Nick pointed out last week, I thought was a great point. This is the biggest game he's ever played in. Now, he didn't go to the big schools and everything. He went to Nebraska and everything, but he wasn't in the national spotlight and everything.
Until his last 3 weeks of his college career at Nebraska, he all of a sudden, he had a monster game on national television, I think, against Missouri, kind of got himself in the Heisman conversation, but they weren't going to play for a BCS national championship. He had played in 3 wild card weekend games, 2 with Detroit, 1 with Miami, and lost them all. So last week was the biggest game of his career, and now this week becomes.
Right, so I think their overall attitude, now their linebackers, I do believe that's the weakest part of their defense. And it's question marks is Marcus Peters. Because I believe Talib wasn't there in the first time they matched up. He'll be back. He's more solid. He's more predictable than Marcus Peters is. But Marcus Peters, when you're playing against the Saints, you can't have the type of attitude that he's had on Twitter and in his interviews, taking it personal. Because Sean Payton, they will run a double move on you. They will set you up. They will make your eyes think something else is coming and have someone else either go into your zone or take advantage of your bad technique that he has sometimes in man-to-man. So if I was him, I would get focused because Sean Payton and them, I know Sean. Sean Payton is coming after Marcus Peters on Sunday. And the reason, not just because he's out there on the field, he has poor technique, he grabs and clutches in man-to-man, and he's not very, very fast down the field.
Well, look, it's going to be hard for the Rams defense to play any worse than they did in the first half of that last game. Giving up 35 points in the first half is rough. Now, the Saints didn't score again until 6 minutes in the fourth quarter.
Until that play we're just showing.
Yeah, so they got some things together. This is also a game where neither quarterback was sacked in the game. I imagine that's going to change. So philosophically, they're going to bring some different things. And here's what I'll say about Marcus Peters. Watching him come out of college, he's one of the most talented guys that I'd seen since Darrelle Revis. He's got that type of ability, and ideally with this level of motivation to back up the words that he's now put out into the world, we're going to see whether or not he can do that. Adding Aqib Talib is huge. Let's hold Michael Thomas to less than 200 yards. Let's say we just cut it down to like 100 yards, 150. Like let's cut 60 or 70 yards off his production, and they're in good shape. And then you saw what happened at the end of the first half. The Rams are going to try to drive. They end up throwing a pick, and that changes, a few plays here and there, and this game is dramatic.
I want to talk to you about Marcus Peters and corners like him, because you made a good part of your living coaching that position, obviously coaching the defense, but you had to focus on defensive backs at one point, I know. What do you do with a corner that has, you said that level of ability, but has never... He's always been, his whole pro career, a guy that might lead the league in interceptions in any given year, and he also might lead the league in plays of 40-plus yards given up. Like, is there a way to tamper down both of those so it's more consistent production, or is he just who he's going to be?
Well, when I was dealing with those guys, it was just a function of how rich do you want to be? You know, if you listen to what I'm telling you, you'll be very rich, and you'll be very successful. And it's a function of saying, here's what you do well, here's what you do poorly, here's how you can fix it, and showing them tangible things to address their game. Now, whether or not they want to accept that coaching and whether or not they want to work on that skill set is up to them. He's got all the ability in the world, and it's really a function of how good does he want to be, so when he's 65 or 70 and he's sitting on his porch, he doesn't look back at his career and say, I would have, could have, wish I did this.
And Coach mentioned someone that I think is very relevant, and that's Darrelle Revis. And when you mention someone the same type of ability as Darrelle Revis, to me, what stands out is Revis, he didn't have a weakness. Revis was a guy who studied himself and studied the opposition, a lot like Deion Sanders. They never give him credit for how smart they were. Revis was silent but very, very tough. Marcus Peters, he's tough, and he talks very tough, so it's a different presentation week in and week out. Man, Darrelle Revis, one of the best corners to ever play this game, and the reason why was because he studied himself and he continued to get better at his weaknesses. He was a guy who didn't guess a lot. What he did was he knew your tendencies, and he would read your tendencies and your routes and build
and he
make
could
big
catch
plays.
up, right? Like, he could get beat. And
I would say he has more pure speed than Marcus Peters, but he doesn't get himself in a bad position from a technique standpoint as much as Marcus Peters does either.
He was a very complete player in terms of he played the run. He was physical at the line of scrimmage. He had a good base. He didn't have elite ball skills. I'd say if there's one deficiency, he didn't create a ton of turnovers like a Ty Law or a Asante Samuel. But all that being said, Marcus Peters has put out, we're going to eat some gumbo. So, okay, there's going to be plenty of gumbo available, and let's just see who's eating and who gets their tongue burned.
Let's get back to the matchup of this game. If you assume that both of these offenses are going to put points up, you have a Saints defense that started the season slow, picked up steam, and is playing really well. You have a Rams defense that started really well, sort of lost a little steam and came back down to earth. And it seems like both of these defenses are now on par. How evenly matched are these two teams, Coach?
Well, I think that they're very evenly matched. To me, it's a function of how well each defense deals with the adjustments the offenses force you to make, and whether or not they're going to bring some things that are creative, some things that especially with Drew Brees. To me, Drew Brees, you've got to bring, and I've talked about this with other quarterbacks, bring some things he hasn't seen, even if it's not the most sound thing in the world.
Like
because
what?
Well, I mean, you can overload pressure.
Vacate a zone.
Vacate zones, show one thing, do another thing. And he may catch you in that, but he may catch you when you're the most sound. So you could get killed a lot of different ways. At least you have a chance to make a play on him. And look, you've got to make a play on him. 35 points in the first half isn't going to cut it.
And it's really interesting when you're saying do something that might not be sound. Troy Polamalu, Peyton Manning will talk about how Polamalu was the player he was most frustrated playing against because Polamalu wouldn't be where he was supposed to be.
Him and Junior Seau.
Oh, sure. There's another example. It is a guy in the front seven as opposed to the back end safety, but Peyton Manning would do such a great job as Drew Brees does watching film, knowing, okay, you're showing me this, even if it's a disguise, this is where the X's should be to our O's, and a guy that had that level of ability to freelance and would be somewhere else, it really threw Peyton off. It's what you're talking about with Tom Brady, that if he knows what you're doing, you're dead before the play has been snapped. Drew Brees, that similar player. Now, I don't know that that the Rams, maybe LaMarcus Joyner can do some of that. Maybe, I don't know exactly the person on their defense they would assign that to, but they've got to throw a wrinkle, because if not, you're just hoping and praying a guy drops the ball on 3rd and long. You're hoping and praying there's a muffed punt. You've got to do something that gives you a chance to flip the game.
And even if it's incorporating some double teams on Michael Thomas, working some of that in so that in a key situation, you know that he's the got-to-have-it player.
Yes.
You know that when everything is on the line, he's the guy that they're going to go to. And in big games, you always hear historic coaches say, don't think plays, think players. So there's the player that's going to get the ball. Make sure he's not the one that kills you.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from First Things First, or go watch a few segments from our other shows on FS1.